Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Imperfection Wellness Podcast, where today we finish up with my conversation with Oosh around applying Possley's paradigm. And so hopefully you've listened to the last episode. If not, I recommend doing so because this is part two of the last episode with Oosh and me. So as always, thank you for listening and wishing you the best on your wellness journey. We looked at several of the concepts, quite a few of the concepts, and one that I want to focus on as well, which I think ties in to what you're talking about, is affirmations and gratitude. And
Mm,
I do believe in positive psychology, and I'm very cautious with toxic positivity. And so I don't ever want, for personally, for me, I don't want to write an affirmation that says, I'm happy all the time. That's not true.
yeah.
That's not my goal. My goal is that I have all these emotions. I'm going to feel them. My friend Donna always said, you were given all these emotions, feel them. You're going to feel them. She's right. So with affirmations, to me, they're foundational statements that are mind shifters. And so when that inner critic comes in, my inner critic said I wasn't good enough. It says I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't worth it. It said some horrible things. And when I align, I'm kind of closing my eyes and aligning with true self and present moment. The paradigm affirmation that I wrote was very simple. I am beautiful. I am strong. I am worth it. I am enough.
Mm,
Those four statements are true statements. Nowhere does it say have a good day or pretend you're happy or anything. I call affirmations and gratitude mind shifters, and they shift your mindset because it was kind of, my neural pathway, my belief, my that inner critic was so ingrained for 40 years of saying I'm not good enough, I'm not worth it, that when I created this paradigm affirmation, I'm like, I need something simple. And a friend of mine reached out to me. She was an early adopter and helped me with several drafts of the book. And she's like, I can't even think of an affirmation. She's like, I'd love you to write one. And so one day I was sitting there, wasn't thinking about it. And again, I had let go. I didn't even know I'd let go. And it came to me. I was so inspired, those four statements. And so
that's beautiful.
affirmations help soften the voice of that inner critic.
Yeah.
And when you're true self, as true self, you're worth it. There's no other way. Like, there's no way anyone is here on this earth and not worth it, not enough, not
Mm,
strong, not beautiful. It's that ego voice that says, stay safe. There's fear out there. Let's overcompensate and pretend we're big or small, but we're still,
mm,
we're still based in fear. The affirmation shift helps with that. Does that
yeah,
resonate?
it totally does. But I'm like you, I had this negative connotation to false positive affirmations.
Mhm.
And what I do, and love to share it with any of those that struggle with that as well, is my neuro coach said to me that we have a tendency to have a negative bias. So we always, again, inner critic, we worry about things that go wrong. And he's like, if you struggle with affirmations because you don't believe them or they're too far-fetched, right? He's like, why don't you just start with something that is a shift to a positive bias? And that really made sense to me. So what he taught me was, he said, let's say, and we'll use my example now of setting up the meditation business. So all of these inner critic thoughts, he's like, just shift it and go, what if? So he'd be like, what if you have all of these people that want to come and meditate and you don't even have time? What if you become known for all the good that you're doing? What if whatever that looks like? And he's like, rather than going down this whole, like you said, I'm earning $1 million in 6 months or whatever it is, you just shift that narrative from a what if into a positive bias. Then for me, that really worked, because what that meant was that if I'm looking at that every day, wherever I've written it, I've gone, oh yeah, what if? And automatically just thinking that what if makes you smile, makes you feel good. And it's that energetic shift. And then from there, I was able to go, okay, how can I now frame that in, an affirmation? Um, yeah. So I think that's just a nice little, bridge to get to the affirmations for the people that really struggle. And I think the other thing to mention around affirmations is there's no right and wrong, right? Like an affirmation to you is what feels good for you. It's, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's whatever gives you that positive feeling that, like I said, that just makes you smile when you read it, or it makes you feel connected to it in a positive way. So yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying around that affirmation piece.
One of my, I do a lot of mindfulness tips. So outside of my meditation, I do believe there's, 24 hours in a day. You sleep 6 to 8 hours. And if you meditate, you might meditate for a few minutes a day. We meditate 20 minutes twice a day. What do you do in between those meditations? And one of the mindfulness tips that I talked about, and I did a post on this, is change the story, alluding to kind of what you said. We have this negative bias.
Yeah.
What if we change the story? So I'm making up this horrific doomsday story in my brain. First of all, mentally put up the stop sign and say, stop. Another technique I use, stop, not today. Like I'm choosing for today not to believe that story because it is a story. But if the
Mm,
story creeps back in, then change the story.
change it. Yeah,
Know that it's a
exactly.
story, but change it. Change that negative bias. And I
And
will say,
that goes back to awareness, right? Exactly
yes,
where we started with this whole conversation is have the awareness that you need to change the story and not
yes,
just continuously stay in there, right? That's going back to that first level of the paradigm to say stop. Because I think again, when we have these inner critic thoughts, we're so used to them being there, but we
yes.
actually don't say stop. We don't challenge them.
We believe them. We don't
We believe
challenge them.
them. We don't
Correct.
challenge them. So yeah, I love that you said that, is to go, hey, thank you, ego, for protecting me, but stop.
Yes.
I don't want to hear that today. Um, yeah, and you look at it, like I said at the beginning of this episode, that the concepts are not hard. It's a framework and it's reminding you of these tools that we have that does take effort. Like, let's be honest, there is effort there that we need to put in, but it's the same effort as doing nothing.
In the book that is forthcoming, I talk about my ego and when I personified my ego, because again, even if I flip the story into positive, I'm still aware that it's story. I'm still aware that
Yeah.
I'm time traveling and storytelling. So my awareness to me is such a foundational step. But if I'm going to be stuck in story, then flip it. So change the story. Going back to ego, I don't know where this personification came, and it's actually not a person, it's an animal. The Tasmanian devil from
Yeah.
the Looney Tunes Bugs Bunny commercial
Yeah.
cartoons. And I call him Taz Scottie because he's this whirlwind of chaos wreaking havoc. And I remember the first day that I pictured this, I was sitting there, I was in a letting go technique. I was kind of just sitting there and I reached out and hugged him.
Mm,
And as I hugged him, he clawed my eyes out. He tried to rip my head off. He took the skin off. He ripped an arm off. And it instantly grew back because I knew as true
yeah.
self, no
Yeah.
harm can come to me. And I hugged him. And I'm like, we're not enemies. The ego is not bad.
Yeah.
As humans, we will always have thoughts. We will always have ego. But as I hugged him, and I'm like, we're in this together. And I said, I love you. And out of nowhere, the Tasmanian devil form changed and shifted into the 3 to 4 year old
Mm,
scared gay boy
mm,
growing up
mm,
in a small farming town who was scared shitless that he would be disowned and that no one would want to be with him, and that like this whole story opened up for me. And that little 3 to 4 year old version of me, it was me as a child, was crying in a corner scared to death.
mm.
And I hugged that version of myself and I instantly started, emotionally releasing, crying, letting all this out. And I'm like, wow, the ego is me. It's an aspect of
Yeah.
me. And there's more to me than just that ego. And that critic is not trying to undermine and make me a bad person. It's weirdly trying to protect me. And my friend Megan, she's like, you're telling me all this stuff. How is the ego protecting you? I said, because it's keeping me small.
Safe.
It's
Yeah.
fear
Well,
based.
it's safe, isn't it?
It's
It's a
safe.
perception.
It thinks it's a misperception that
Yeah.
it's, I did my little bunny ears again.
Yeah.
It's a misperception that it's keeping you safe when it's not. And the overcompensation is that same fear. But if I overcompensate, I can self inflate. I can make myself so emotionally big that no one can touch me, but I'm still scared. And so,
Yeah.
again, going back to, we don't fight ego, we don't fight our thoughts, we observe them and we kind of float
So,
around.
yeah.
And if we're going to tell a story, change the story. And I believe it was you. I want to go back to affirmations. I believe it was you. And if it wasn't, we can skip off of it. But I thought you and I talked a few weeks ago about affirmations. And you said when you do an affirmation, you want to embody it and feel it. Was that you? Okay, we're going to cut this part out. So I was, because but it was Jenna.
Jenna.
Okay, we'll cut this part out. So I was talking. So Jenna is one of our cohort teachers who helped out, and she said she was, I believe it was at a conference with Eckhart Tolle, and he said when you have your affirmations, you want to feel and embody them. You want
Yeah.
them to resonate. So Oosh, it goes back to what you said, and you're so good about this. And this is your EQ coaching coming out.
Mm.
It's going to be different for each person.
Yeah.
And so for her, Jenna, she shared you want to embody and personify and feel that affirmation. So the paradigm affirmation might not resonate. That's okay. Write your own, but don't
Yes.
write it to create a mood. Don't try to falsely feel good. You might have a bad day. That's okay. Build it on a foundation.
Yeah. I love that.
Within affirmations, we also have gratitude. And the reason I kept them together is because I think they're both kind of that
Hand in hand.
mind shifter. They're hand in hand. And the other reason I like gratitude is every morning when I wake up, I open my eyes and I'm like, thank you for today. Sometimes I don't always feel it, but I know I say it. And I have two stickers, two post it notes, one in my kitchen, one in my bathroom. And on it, it says gratitude. And
Mm.
I made it a non negotiable. That was something Ush taught me many months ago. You make something a non negotiable. So my non negotiable is if I see that post it note, I have to list something I'm grateful for. And the reason is gratitude actually releases, studies are showing it releases dopamine, the happy hormone.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean you're not going to have a bad day. So, all the stuff I'm talking about with the paradigm, I still have bad days. We're going to suffer loss. We're going to grieve. We're going to have moments happen that are upsetting to us. It just means we don't store them anymore. And so, with the gratitude, if I'm having a horrible day and I'm down on myself, I'll look around my apartment and I'm like, thank you for this apartment. Thank you for the food I'm eating. Thank you for, my vision that I can read this book. When we bring in gratitude, affirmations and gratitude are those mind shifters. And so
Mm.
when you talk about your inner critic, Oosh, and I'm sure you do this, I am grateful for the last 8 years of my EQ.
Mm.
And I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to
To shift.
accentuate what I'm doing and
Yeah.
build this
Mm.
next wellness meditation. I'm calling it
Yeah.
an empire for you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we overcomplicate gratitude, right? Like I've spoken to people that go, oh, they get told to like journal every day, or there's so many different things. And just one thing I'd like to share that works is if there's days you don't feel grateful, that is okay. Like that is okay. Yeah, I'm like you, I will say thank you every day. And I feel like for me, that works, and I feel extremely grateful every morning when I wake up, and that's one of the easiest ways to do it. A really cool thing I actually do with my daughter is we've got this jar at home, and just whenever you feel like it, and there's no hard and fast rule, is you just on a piece of paper write something you're grateful for. You chuck it in the jar and you forget about it, and then at Christmas we'll open it and we'll read them. And there could be 10 things, there could be 100 things, there could be 200 things, but it's just really tapping into feeling it in the moment and yeah, writing it. And I think the other thing around when you feel challenged, for me, I'm a big fan of Gabby Bernstein. Like I love her stuff around how the universe supports you. And I love her analogy, and I use this all the time, is she says that when we go through a challenge, It's a universal assignment. So the universe is sending you an assignment and
Mhm.
you have to go through it, and you're going to learn. It's going to feel crap, but you're going to do it because it's an assignment. And that's what I think of is when I have a challenge, I'm like, thank you, universe, for this challenge.
Make it a
And that just,
positive. You just shifted.
yeah,
You just, thank you.
shifted it. And
You,
you know what it does? It takes the charge out of it.
yes.
How
It
I
takes the
say it.
sting
Right?
out. It takes the charge out. It takes,
Yeah.
absolutely,
It,
Oosh.
it just, yeah, it takes that charge out. And that doesn't mean you're going to feel great. Doesn't mean you're going to feel automatically grateful that you're going through the shit, but it takes that sting, that charge out. And then you go, okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to have to face this challenge. Yeah, but I think people just overcomplicate the gratitude piece. Do it how it works for you, right?
Absolutely. And for me, they're simple and they repeat. So it's not, I didn't say I have to have a new one or a different one every time I see the post-it
Yeah,
note.
same one.
And they're almost always the same several things that I am honestly not, it reminds myself it's that mind shifter. Um, so, we talked a bit about the inner critic, we talked about the awareness, we talked about creating space. And, there's two areas we can go to action or to forgiveness. And I just want to touch on forgiveness, which I'm not sure how pertinent that is in this situation, but it is one of the 9 concepts.
Mm,
And the only thing I want to say about forgiveness is the reason I added the concept is because for me, it was a huge mental block of a couple of situations in my life that I couldn't move on from. And I held a lot of anger inside. And this anger manifested in many different ways. But a lot of times, what you'll hear people say is rarely are you only angry for what sets you off. There's usually a lot more behind that because when your body wants to release something, when your nervous system has too much, anger, stress, frustration, whatever it may be, when it finds an outlet, it's going to leap out. And I was sitting there one day and I was talking to my sister and I was just fuming. And she looked at me and she's like, you realize that's only hurting you. The situation you were angry at happened years ago. The person you're mad at's moved on. You're still carrying this weight. And that light bulb went off. And that's why I included forgiveness. We forgive if and when we want to, only when we're ready. And when we forgive, it doesn't mean it was okay. It doesn't mean what happened
yeah.
was okay. What I was angry at, on paper, you could say I had every right to be angry. And so forgiving did not negate what happened.
Yeah.
Forgiving did not say what happened was okay. Forgiving, again, it I no longer was carrying the emotional weight of the situation. It doesn't mean I'm going to forget it. How could I forget it? It left a wound, and your brain is programmed. Like our brains are programmed when that emotional situation happens that affects us that greatly. To say forgive and forget, I think
Yeah.
that's hard on us. And so again, I don't think it's super pertinent here, but I'd love your perspective on forgiveness just because you and I love to go back and
Mhm.
forth on these kind of concepts.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think it can't be forced and it has to come from within. And the only thing I would add is you've heard of the analogy is that, when we're angry, it's the equivalent of holding on to the stone that's really hot,
Mhm.
but wanting to hurt someone else, but actually we're the ones that are burning. So I always remember that. I've learned that from a young age. And when I look at forgiveness, I use the analogy of I'm letting go of the stone.
There we
That's
go.
it. So I'm not burning myself. That doesn't mean I don't still want to throw it at that person or I don't want to hurt that person. But for me, forgiveness is forgiving almost myself for holding on to this, right? And then at a later stage, if I'm willing to forgive the other person, that for me is a separate conversation and a
Absolutely.
separate
And
issue. But the forgiveness first has to be because I want to let go of that hot stone.
I talked to a friend of mine about forgiveness, and she's like, I feel bad that I'm not ready to forgive. And I said, that's okay. Forgive yourself. Don't create an endless loop that then
Yes.
you're now in another situation that's even worse because not only are you mad at situation A, now you're mad at yourself for not forgiving situation A, which is creating a double loop. And I said, so forgive yourself and be okay. Time will allow it, if
Yeah.
and when you want to. So something that happened a week ago versus a year ago versus 10 years ago versus there are some things so egregious you might say I'm never going to forgive. That's okay. Work through the emotional energy that it has on you. And I think uh, what people think, that friend I was talking to, is that, well, if I forgive, it means it's okay and it means I'll forget. I didn't say that. It's
No.
about carrying the emotional energy. So I like
Yeah.
your analogy as well.
Yeah.
So what does this all lead up to, Oosh? So we've talked about all of this, and it leads up. I started writing this book in 2009,
Mm,
put it away, lost it, and I started writing the book again. And I found my notes midway through my book, and I could not believe how many things lined up. The
yeah.
reason I didn't finish the book in 2009 was because I didn't have the last step, which was the action step. And
Yeah.
you asked this question, which was a lead in to the last concept, which I didn't really want to give away at the moment.
Yeah.
Action or next right action is so important when we start creating that space. And even when we're not, so the space that we create from being the observer is generally, for many people, unless you are one of those rare, very rare, one in millions, has instant enlightenment of where they're like,
Mm,
I am so separate and I know I'm not my thoughts and I'm
yeah.
pure and I exude enlightenment. That's not us. That's not me. So what happens when we create that space is, you know what? How do I sustain it? And that's where we talked a little bit about charm, that nudge, that I'm
Mm,
going to let go and surrender. And it doesn't mean I'm apathetic. I still make choices. I still perform action. I still plan, even though I live in present moment. I have to make an appointment with the doctor. I have to graduate. Like I have to plan. It's how we interact with it, creating the next right action. And for me, one of the most powerful next right actions to sustain the gains with the paradigm is I use it hand in hand with Vedic meditation. And
mm,
so for you, Ush, it's beautiful that the scenario you were willing to share, and thank you again for your vulnerability and for sharing this, is that you're going on to a wellness, mindfulness, Vedic meditation, and I'd love to hear a little bit about, more about what you have planned with Loka, because I think it all resonates so beautifully because a lot of what you're doing is all about finding that next right action, which is the last concept of the paradigm.
yeah, you're right. And I'm actually going to take it a step back because for me, it's about action of reminding myself to use this paradigm and the tools, to be honest.
Oh, I
Because
love that. Thank you.
I've got down pat the work I need to do. For me, it's actually doing the work on myself to be in the best place to then do the work that I actually need to do. So for me, it's around, reminding myself that it's okay to have these stories, to learn to say stop when they come, to, yes, I meditate twice a day, but can I intentionally go into observer mode,
Mhm.
even more, um, and potentially use something that we call the cosmic body technique, right? As a way of becoming the observer. And I don't do that a lot. So that's another topic for another time when you learn how to meditate. But things like that, I think for me, it's around action around the wellness side for me. And then I think that will automatically fall into place with, you know, doing my website, promoting myself, doing my socials, getting, testimonials, getting clients in. And then going back to, for me, and I know we've spoken about this a lot, is, my favorite part of the paradigm and my favorite concept of all is the surrender and waiting for nature to take its course. The seed has been planted, and
Mhm.
yes, my inner critic is going to rear its ugly head, but go, that's okay. The seed has been planted, and it will, grow and sow as it needs to in the time that it is.
Based on your answer, which was beautiful as always, this is wonderful. I would like your next action step to be print this out and have
Yes.
small copies of it in two
Yeah.
places. And
Yeah.
they're two convenient places because what happens is we feel great right now. And
Mm,
when I was creating the paradigm, what I said
mm,
was, how many times have we gone to a webinar? We've seen a TED talk, we've gone to a presentation, we walk out of there, we're like, gosh, I feel so invigorated, this is great. And then we get punched in the gut or in the face because reality sets in, and we have a sick child or a family member or a work stress or something falls through, or we're missing a flight or whatever it may be, and it all gets thrown away. What do we grasp? What do we reference?
That's
That's why
exactly what I'm saying is what do
that's
we do to bring
yes.
us back to that? This
And
is what I need to do. Or, and you, like you said, if you've got all those concepts of the paradigm there, you might go, right, today I'm going to really lean into the gratitude, or today I'm going to lean into acceptance and observing. And yeah, it's almost like a toolbox. And you go, I'm going to use this tool today. And then having that frame that you beautifully presented to go, this is what I'm going to pick today.
because you're going to forget it in the chaos. You
Yeah.
are. In the
Yeah.
chaos, so as humans, our rational brain, our prefrontal cortex, that is cut off when we go into a stressful chaotic event.
Yeah.
I have a, podcast I want to talk about amygdala hijack, which is the ultimate shutting down of your rational prefrontal cortex, where people do things that they would never do if they were rationally thinking. But when you're in amygdala hijack, when you're in that overload mode, when you're in that stressed out mode, you're not going to go and print a copy of the paradigm. So I say to people, print a
Yeah.
copy of it, use it as your roadmap, have it at your nightstand, have it in the bathroom, put it on your refrigerator. And I've talked to people who've done this. And one of my, the friend who helped me kind of with the early drafts of the book that I mentioned, it was on the refrigerator, and her and her husband were able to have dialogues around it, being like, oh, we're really in ego right now. Like, can we just
Yes.
like take a step back and maybe take a deep breath?
Yeah.
And that's where, so one action for her was printing it out, having it conspicuous as that roadmap, that toolbox. And then also I do a lot of mindful breathing discussions, and I really do believe the power of, when we are stressed, the quickest way is to do a quick centering mindful breathing technique. And I might as well mention it here. If you haven't heard of it, you can go to my website, imperfectionwellness.com. There's a simple mindfulness breathing guide, but the easiest breathing one that I do is box breathing. You
Mm.
inhale for a count of 4, you hold that for a count of 4, you exhale for a count of 4, and then you hold that, exhale for a count of 4. You do that 2 or 3 times, 1 or 2 minutes, to kind of center yourself. But you're not going to remember to do some of these things. And so that's why I still, to this day, if you came into, where I live, you'd see Post-it notes, because we need those reminders, because society is not reminding us. Social media
Mm.
is not reminding us of this. The 24/7 news cycle is not reminding you of
Mm.
this. Our stressful work environment, our political, the political environment, which we talked about in the last episode, the November election in the US is really stressing people out. It's not reminding you to be nice to yourself. And so when you have this paradigm, have it where you will see it daily. For me, I don't refer to the printed copies anymore because it's so ingrained into my brain. And during the break, Usha and I were talking, I'll jump from awareness to letting go back over to be the observer. And there are still times where I'm like, I am not sitting in acceptance. I am really struggling. And so I don't want anyone to think that we have all the answers. We apply the tools we talk about. And I just got to say, this was a fascinating episode.
So good.
This is so like, this was amazing for me to share my work with someone who is just, I respect so much and has helped me so much on my journey.
Likewise.
Well, listeners, thank you. In the last episode, we talked about possibly having Ush back because we have so many things we love talking about. So
We
please
do.
like, please comment, please email info@imperfectionwellness.com and let us know what topics you'd love to hear about. But we really want Ush to come back, so we need some interactions with this podcast.
Thank you, everyone.
Anything to close
Thank
on, Ush?
No, thank you. It was just so refreshing to go through it and, be okay with not having the answers and just be led to go, have a think about this, have a think about this, and a reminder of what the tools are. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Really appreciated it.
You're welcome. And while I knew the gist of what we were going to talk about, this was not scripted or rehearsed. We literally jumped on a Zoom, and I just said, I have the paradigm pulled up, and
Yeah.
we were going to go through it. And this was a real life session that I'm glad you were able to listen in on and see. And thank you so much for listening in. And as always, wishing you the best on your wellness journey. Bye-bye.
Well, that wraps up the 3-part series of Oosh and Scottie talking about how I got into wellness, how I leaned in towards creating Possley's paradigm, and then part 1 and 2 of applying Possley's paradigm to something she's dealing with, imposter syndrome. And that's what this podcast is going to be about. So hopefully this resonates with you. I would love to hear, comments and feedback on the podcast, what you'd like to hear about. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them right here in the podcast or email info@imperfectionwellness.com. I'll put this information in the show notes as well because I want to create a podcast that resonates with people. So if I'm talking about a concept and I don't explain it well, or there's something else you'd like to hear about, please let me know. I've had friends and colleagues recommend many topics, and so there are plenty of topics to talk about, but I want to make sure they're resonating with you. So please drop me a note, drop me a comment, and as always, thanks for listening and wishing you the best on your wellness journey.